Thank you, everybody, again for being here. Just real quick, I'm Paul Sorensen. I'm the director of the St. Louis Regional Data Alliance at the University of Missouri St. Louis. And we're really excited to welcome all of you today. I also want to apologize for my intense but surprisingly comfortable mask. With COVID and flu and RSV and having 2 kids under 4, this is as much to protect you as it is to protect me. But thank you so much for being here. We're going to wrap up the day with a fireside chat. So a conversation and some food for thought to sort of cap off a day in which we were all chewing on a lot. And so the first thing we're going to do before we have some Q&A with the panelists is to invite a speaker. We're going to beam a speaker in to talk about data and technology and really get us thinking about the tech that comes next, to use the title of her book. So I'm going to introduce real quick Afua Bruce. Afua is a leading public interest technologist whose career has spanned government, nonprofit, academic sectors. She's worked, it's a long list, and an exciting list at DataKind, the White House, the FBI, IBM. And the book that Afua wrote, The Tech That Comes Next, with Amy Sample Ward from N10, really dives into the intersection of data, policy, equity, society, and how we need to approach these items together. And so please join me for welcoming Afua, who's going to beam in from the screen to set the stage about our last conversation.
Thank you so much. And maybe if someone can give me a thumbs up that you can hear and see me, that would be great. Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, good afternoon to you all. Congratulations on making it to this point in the day. I know that as we are transitioning to into a hybrid situation and being back in person, sometimes conferences that seemed so easy before, by the end of the day can seem a little bit more tiring. So I'm glad to be joining you today. Sorry I couldn't make it in person, but am grateful for thoughtful use of technology so that I, and it looks like several others, could be attending virtually today. Now, I know that there have been a number of great conversations already today about data and social impact. I know there were sessions on innovative grant making and collaboration for equitable community-centered data practices, capacity building for the social sector, and data drills, a tool for multi-agency data collaboration. And in many spaces, conversations about data are well, just that, conversations just about the data, conversations about what data exists, conversations about what to collect and what not to collect, conversations about what insights can be gathered from the data through traditional analysis or through a bit more complicated data science or artificial intelligence, and hopefully also conversations about the security and privacy of data as well. Now, these conversations are all necessary, but they're insufficient. I'd argue it's true everywhere, but especially when we talk about using technology and data in the social impact sector, we really must consider what we do with data supports or contradicts some of our stated goals around positive social impact, around social change, around equity, around justice, around inclusion, and more. And because data isn't just about the numbers, it's about the people behind the numbers. I had a mentor who once told me, behind every number is a name, and behind every name is a story, and every story matters. And so I'm excited to join you to round out the day today in these data conversations with a focus on the stories we get from and we create from data, specifically how we implement equitable approaches to data and technology. You heard a little bit about me earlier, but in short, I really spend a lot of time thinking about the intersection between technology and policies and community. How can we create a world where they really all work together? And a lot of the consulting work I do, I really enjoy combining some of my data science and software engineering experience with my experience developing and deploying technology in and with communities to really bring equity-based data organizations and analysis frameworks into all of the work that I do. And so I'm going to offer up to you all today 4 things that I think you should keep in mind when we really think about using technology and data effectively for social impact. The first is around intentional design. The second is about collaborative learning. The third about community voice. And the fourth is about privacy and security. So first, starting with intentional design. This is really thinking through how and what are you collecting and are you using? And who are you including and designing for in the work that you're doing? So I say often, technology isn't a naturally occurring resource. There's no sort of river of technology just flowing by the side that you lean into and you have to scoop it up and just make do. Technology is something we actively create. Data is something we actively steward. And so because of this, it both means that we have great opportunities to affect how these can be used, but also we have to take care to account for and mitigate biases that we as humans all bring into our design and use of data and technology. So it's important that you, as you're doing your work, really start by identifying any bias that is in data sets, especially if you are using information that is based on historical trends or historical collection, making sure to account for gender, race, and a host of other different demographic factors or location factors in that data is incredibly important. Thinking through what laws and policies might have affected what data was collected and used before building any type of tool on top of that is really important. It's then also important as we think about intentionally designing solutions to really carefully consider what you're collecting and why. There can be a temptation to just collect all of the information possible because you can, or because someone says that perhaps it's a good idea and perhaps you may need some data at some point down the road someday. But I'd really encourage you to really think about what you need to collect and why. The amount of time and effort it takes to collect this information, to store it, to process it, to protect it is not insignificant. And so really then thinking about how much you need to collect and what you're going to use it for is really important. It's then important on that using it for, using what you're going to use information for, to really identify what you're going to do with the information you collect. Who has the power to turn on and off access to the data? What happens if you succeed? What happens if you fail? Really thinking through the answers to those last 3 questions can help you determine what information you need to collect and what might be fine going uncollected. Over collection is a temptation that I think the social impact sector faces often once it has resources to collect information. And so being really intentional about saying, here's something we don't need to collect, because if we fail at this, it will actually inflict harm on the people who we say we're serving. Or even if we succeed at this, it could inflict harm on the people that we're serving. The second point I wanted you to keep in mind, or I want you to encourage you to keep in mind, is that about collective learning. And this is the idea and just the recognition of the fact that the great thing about leveraging data and technology for social impact is that we don't have to do it alone. In doing the research for The Tech That Comes Next, which is mentioned as a book I wrote with Amy Sample Ward earlier this year, one of the things that I enjoyed most about that book was just getting to hear the stories of people who have positively used technology and data in their lives for social impact. We quoted people who had worked in colleges and academic institutions to use data science to help an additional 900 students graduate who otherwise would have dropped out of school. We talked to another organization that used technology effectively to help scale a local-based organization that rescued leftover food and provided it to people facing food insecurity, to help them go from serving one small neighborhood in New York City to actually serving 8 different cities all across the US. We talked to another organization who was able to effectively use technology to design a socially appropriate situation, a socially appropriate light product for use internationally. And so it was really exciting to talk to all of those people, because there are people in many sectors who are advancing the ways that we use tech and data today within social impact specifically. We can learn from those. We can use that as ways to inspire what we can do next, as well as to think about how we pivot. And so we're not continuously creating the wheel. those of us who are working in different social impact organizations, whether they're a nonprofit organization, in a government agency, frankly, just don't have time to continually recreate the wheel. Sometimes it feels like we don't have time to even do the work that we want to do. And so really being intentional about learning from others is important. The flip side of that, of course, is that you have to be intentional about sharing your lessons learned with others. So as you figure out ways to navigate bureaucratic processes, to create data sharing agreements, to create new ways of using technology, to get around, or not get around, but to use procurement practices for your own strength and to actually accomplish the goals that you want, or to better work with your donors, or to work with your staff at your social impact organizations, it's important to figure out some way to document that and share that with others so that you too can be part of this collective learning opportunity. The third point that I wanted to emphasize today is the importance of really bringing the community voice into the work that we do. This is the central tenet of the book that we wrote about the book, The Tech That Comes Next, is that in order to change our relationship with technology, in order to build a more equitable world, we have to center communities. We have to center specifically communities of people who are from traditionally marginalized or historically overlooked communities. But we have to take it back to communities of people and say, if we are building technology, because again, it's not a naturally occurring resource, who is driving what's created and why it's created. This is truly the power of the structure of the social impact sector, is that those pathways and those conversations have already been started. And it's a matter of really leaning into that and then figuring out how to take some of those insights and bring them back into the technology that's being used, the data that's being collected. Technology is a way to advance the mission of organizations. Data helps people to be seen and can answer, or at least provide some insight into key questions that organizations have, that leaderships have, and the communities themselves have. So to have a positive social impact, this activity that goes throughout the cycle and even including the policymaking process, which I know has been a conversation as well today, this whole cycle, this whole ecosystem really must be driven by going to communities and saying, what are your biggest challenges? What are your biggest dreams? And using those answers to then drive the work of technology providers and social impact organizations and policymakers, and even funders and investors. The second part of this recommendation I have for you about centering community voice is to really think through what it means to have community ownership, because it's important to center the community in the requirements process, center the community in the design and implementation, but also as you think about long-term sustainability, you want to consider what it means for communities to own that data. There are far too many arrangements that are made that are actually exploitive. The researchers, organizations, and even companies can come into a community, can enter into a community to take data, but not do anything to give it back. So as you design programs and think about the ways that you are wanting to use technology and to use data, really be intentional about making sure that you build pathways for communities to benefit from the use of that data, as well as for communities to own the data, if not the results of the data itself. So if you have entered a community to get information, to get data around health information databases, for example, or crime indicators, or housing and equity statistics, then also think about in your program design, what are you doing to share those insights back with those same communities? If you have worked with a specific population to get health information to make sure that overall the medical field is more inclusive, are you sharing those same insights back with the community that you saw, that you interacted with first? If you've captured crime indicators and crime statistics, are you actually using that for policy making that is driving towards the policy means that these communities have identified that they want and that they need? Or if you're looking at that housing and equity statistics information, how is that information you're collecting actually empowering people in those communities? How is it actually affecting home ownership rates or access to housing, or what equity people can hold in their homes and in their communities? So really making sure that as you center community voice, it is about taking in the input to drive the development and implementation conversations, but it is also thinking about the path to ownership for that community of that information. And the final recommendation I have for you is really thinking about privacy and security by design and from the start when you do this work. If you think about, so I am joining you physically from Texas today, and you can imagine an organization, a nonprofit organization that's providing services to undocumented citizens or undocumented individuals in the US and Texas specifically. Now, this organization could have adjusted to center and community voice and recognize that many of their people are interacting and have access to Facebook. So a particular nonprofit could be posting all of their events on Facebook, and people are responding to events in Facebook. Well, this is actually creating a data trail that bad actors could then take advantage of, as this is now creating a data trail of who is interested in this and when they're going to be where, and what type of involvement people have had over time. So this is one example of why it really matters for, as we work with social impact organizations, to think about what data looks like, how you protect the data, where you should be sharing data, where you should be collecting data, and what data you can clean up. Similarly, as we continue to think about vulnerable populations that the social impact sector often works with, these organizations are collecting oftentimes the most vulnerable and intimate details of someone's story. They're collecting when people have lost access to their homes, to their families, when people need access to additional resources, that many cases that they are legally entitled to. So caring for the individual actually means caring for that data as well, making sure that only the people who need access to that data can get access to that data, protecting the data from cybersecurity attacks or from other bad actors, or even just being misused, and allowing then these same vulnerable populations to be targeted in a new way. And so with that, have enjoyed, again, being virtually with you today, and we'll just implore you to remember that quote of "with great power comes great responsibility" is true for tech and data in the social impact sector. Well, it's true generally, but it's true for any work that you do as you are designing how you can use technology, how you can use data to really advance the mission of social impact organizations and not compete with the mission or other priorities. So it's true generally in general terms, and many of the examples that we provided in the book, but this is definitely an area where local solutions matter. And so I hope I've given a good framework, and I hope you enjoy the upcoming roundtable about what's being done and can be done from the featured panelists in the Fireside chat that's coming up on what's next for St. Louis. Thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you again, Afua. That was a lot of just a lot of great substance packed into 15 minutes. And what we're going to try to do now is apply a lot of what Afua talked about, and the thinking around community voice and intentional design, and where and how data and technology should be deployed in St. Louis, and start to think through what's next for our local landscape. So this is a fireside chat. So Jen Rose, I can light a small fire right here on the table next to me.
That's a great idea.
Okay, great. While I build a small fire next to me, yeah, marshmallows, s'mores. This is the kickoff. I'm sure that's totally good by WashU policy. I wanted the fellow panelist fireside chatters to
Millions
quickly
find a low cost.
Okay. We good? Okay.
Oh, yes, the Netflix fire.
Yes, the Netflix fire. Were you going to bring up? Oh, yeah, thank you. So, actually, this is very nice. He's bringing up a video of fire to play in the background, which will be a very nice touch to my joke. While that happens, if you two would quickly introduce yourself, your role in the landscape, and how, just sort of generally as a general overview. Thank you, cozy. This is going to really tie the room together. Yes, definitely deserves all the AV support deserves applause. But yeah, real quickly, Catherine, if you could start off, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and how you intersect with data and technology for good.
Sure. And thanks so much for the fire. I've been a little bit chilly all day, so this is great, very atmospheric. I feel so lucky to be here. This has been such a wonderful conversation today. Many, many touch points for me in terms of the approaches that the Missouri Foundation of Health takes around data, centering communities, being responsive to what communities want to know about. And trying to foster that insight. So hopefully I can give back a little bit of the benefit that I've gotten today as well by sharing with you a little bit of information about MFH. I will say not so much about myself because that's less interesting. I do want to, for those of you who perhaps don't know very much about Missouri Foundation for Health, I think this is a really great opportunity to just introduce you a little bit to our organization. As a way of also building trust. We want to be very transparent about who we are. We are a private philanthropic foundation, and we exist for the same purposes I think bring us all together today, which is to foster health equity in the state of Missouri. So Missouri Foundation for Health was established in 2000. We are 22 years old. If we were a human, we would be a young adult. Hopefully we are more humble than most young adults, and we have pivoted over the course of our 22 years, very much leaning into social justice mission around health equity across the state. We are what's called a health conversion foundation. So our endowment was established with funds that were created from the conversion of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Missouri from a nonprofit organization to a for-profit organization. The assets of Blue Cross Blue Shield that were accumulated as a nonprofit became part of a public trust that the state of Missouri decided to establish a private foundation for the purposes of advancing the interests and the well-being of Missourians who are least served by existing systems. So we have a systems change mandate, mission, and health equity is at the center of all the work that we do, and we are very data-centric. I lead our learning and research team, and I'm very privileged to lead a team of fantastic and talented evaluators, researchers, and community engagement specialists.
Perfect. Thank you. I was getting a little hot, so we're going to turn the fire off for the moment. We can always bring it back if you get cold. So, Simon, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for sticking it out. My name is Simon Wong. I work for the City of St. Louis out of the Mayor's office as the Chief Technology Officer. Does everybody know what a Chief Technology Officer is, so I don't have to go into all the details, or do you want me to go into it? Go into it? Oh, okay. It has something to do with technology, and so all jokes aside, every organization has an IT department, right, that takes care of all the IT that goes along with it. And there's somebody, either a chief technology officer or a chief information officer or a director that runs that department. So the City of St. Louis already has a chief information officer, and my role in the office of the mayor is actually twofold. One part of it is to help consult with the internal IT organization and help them with their long-range planning and modernization of IT systems. The other aspect of it is a little more externally focused, right? So focusing on initiatives that drives the mayor's agenda. So it might be anything from the digital divide and ensuring every citizen has access to broadband. It could be evaluating how well the Economic Justice Action Plan. Yusuf was here earlier and he talked about ARPA investments and the amount of funds available to the city. There's about $250 million out of ARPA that's going to be invested in, especially in North City. And there's an Economic Justice Action Plan that lays out the priorities for that investment, right? So how do we measure how well those priorities are doing, and are we actually meeting the goals that we set out in the plan. So that would be another initiative that I would be involved with. We are trying to establish a data competency within the city. So the city, and I've only been there a year, so a lot of it, my recent experience has been learning and listening and trying to understand and navigate my way through it. The city has traditionally been very siloed. There's a lot of elected officials that have their own IT departments, and then the police has their own, and the airport has their own. And so there's not a lot of coordination amongst departments. But amongst all this segregation, there's also these pockets of data users, and one of them's in the audience today, that have taken it upon themselves to improve the data competency of the organization. What we don't have is a central group that's responsible for developing data as a competency for the city, right? So there's nobody thinking about governance of the data, security, how often it's refreshed, who maintains the directory of what's available. There's efforts in all of these areas that I've talked about, but there's no centralized authority within the city. So establishing that is also is one of my priorities, and that's what we are working on right now. So I got off on a tangent, I think. I was trying to explain what a chief technology officer does. And so there's the internal focus and the external focus, a lot of it around technology, and obviously with technology, there's a lot of it around data, and how do we leverage data better. Oh, by the way, the mayor, Tishara Jones, for the city, is a self-proclaimed data nerd. If you didn't know, she was the treasurer of the city before she became mayor, before she ran for election. And as treasurer, they rolled out these parking meters, right, that you can pay with your app and all of that. And the difference between these manual coin, insert a coin parking meters and these electronic digital meters that you can pay for and extend your time on your phone is astronomical, right? You have all these usage statistics about exactly when, how long, which ones are deployed, et cetera. So she comes from a background of being a consumer of data. And one of the first conversations with her was, show me the data so that I can make these policy decisions about what needs to be done. So I take that as my mission, one of my missions, and that's what I attempt to do for the city.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Simon, and thank you, Catherine, for that great introduction of your work. And I think that, you know, having both of them up here today was intentional to tie some of the themes around philanthropy and community voice and local government and how all of these things can and should come together. So I think the first big question we wanted to chew on with you is, you know, in your work and thinking about the presentations today, including Afua's, where do you feel like we definitely want to focus more on data and technology, right? Where should data and technology play a larger role in your day-to-day? And then what we would also love you to do is reflect too on a question of where should data and technology take a step back? Because one of the tension points we've seen throughout today is that yes, we need better information, but we also need a healthier process of prioritization and community ownership of it. So the question that I would love, you know, either of you to reflect upon is where should data and technology play a greater role? And where should data and technology take a step back?
Good.
I guess to my mind, it's not a question of the size of the role as much as the type of role and the expansiveness of the role. And just to preface this by saying that the principle that MFH brings to the conversation is, first of all, to establish a baseline understanding and do some myth busting around the power of data to represent an objective truth. I think that we are among many philanthropies that are engaged in an effort to rethink the power structures that are inherent in the way that data is collected, analyzed, and for what use and for whom. In doing that, we recognize that there are many truths and that data should be a way to access insight and triangulate amongst many different ways of thinking about issues. So I think that building on that, then the question becomes much more interesting when we start to think about then what different types of data need to be brought together to build that insight. And that's what I loved about this morning's panel, which was very much around data is for everyone, and there are many types of data, and they need to be treated equally. So while we were all brought up thinking that a nice, clean data set that was rigorously collected and analyzed is atop the hierarchy, and community-generated qualitative data may be at the bottom of the hierarchy, we need to disrupt that. And I think that the foundation is engaged in many different efforts. We heard from Leah Moser from Generate Health and Erica Williams from our Red Circle. MFH has been longtime partners with those organizations, and I think the texture of what they were speaking about is very much representative of how MFH approaches that question. So it's not a larger role, it's a better role. It's a more inclusive role for data in generating insight and coming up with smart solutions.
And Catherine brought up a great point about quantitative and qualitative data, right? And I'm also learning, and what I've learned is both are actually equally important, because the quantitative data can sometimes mask the stories behind actually what's occurring, and only by talking to the people and being out there in community, something Afua mentioned, can you truly get at the root causes of whatever the symptoms you're trying to address. And to go back to Paul's question in terms of how much further can we take technology and data, or how much should we be using it? I think I don't have a definite answer for that. We are definitely learning to be better consumers of data. I mentioned we've been there, I've been there a year, and one of the first things we embarked on was a cohort program by Bloomberg Harvard. It was a city leadership class that had a data track, right? And what they try to do is allow you to pick an aspect of your government, and then they help walk you through how to look at the data that you need to address that issue, what questions you need to be asking, how to eliminate bias and make sure, as Afua mentioned, you don't introduce bias from the capturing of the data. And I see Kalkadan sitting in the audience. She was a fellow in the Office of the Mayor, and she helped us on this performance management program that we looked at. For those of you who live in the city, there's a CSB, which stands for the Citizen Service Bureau. It's basically the help desk for the city. When your services are not working, you call them, or you tweet at them, or you can fill out an online form, and they basically take your request or complaint, and then they pass it on to the departments, right? So we started evaluating that as a proxy for how well departments were developing, or not developing services, discharging their services, how well they were delivering services to the community. So that was an interesting exercise, and we just finished the 6-week instructional portion of it, and we're still having meetings with various city departments about it. And so that was our first organized tutorial on how this administration can actually leverage data to make a difference in the delivery of government services. We actually just started another one in partnership with MasterCard's Center for Inclusive Growth, I think, and the Center for Public Impact, which is a joint partnership with them on data for equity, right? It's to be exposed to thought leaders, tools, data sets that are available to the general public as a way to evaluate equity and I guess analyze investments on how to make investments in your local area. So we're just getting started on the data journey, a lot of education at this point, a lot of training and making false steps and then retracing ourselves, but that's all good. We're also establishing a data group, data capacity, and hoping to hire a manager and a couple of data analysts that can dedicate their time to these types of things as opposed to the reality today, which is part-time attention on the part of other city employees. So we want to dedicate a few people to actually help us collect these data sets, help us clean it, and ensure we have the right governance around it, and help the city to utilize data better.
Great. Yeah, and I appreciate a lot what you both said about trying to make sure that our data and technology practices, if they are going to be equitable, right, and they are going to respond to community, are also trying to encompass the full realm of what people are. I mean, I remember one of the comments this morning from Trooper Sanders at Benefits Data Trust about how much of an impression it left when people were treated kindly, right, on a benefits navigation call. And one of the things that I've been reflecting on is like, what quantitative data could you collect to like capture kindness? Like that was a qualitative experience that meant the world to someone. Like, look, I, keep on these calls trying to get through applications, right? The quantitative data would say, the call was this long, and did you get benefits or did you not get benefits? But that didn't make the difference, right? The difference was that someone was treated like a human. And I think that is a really powerful message, I think, that I'm taking away from today, and it seems like it's also something that you all are actively grappling with at your organizations as well. So in thinking about that community, data practitioner, tension or divide, another thing I was curious about, right? So, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but when I talk about the work that we do and it gets into data and technology, oftentimes people are like, all right, I don't know about all of that technical stuff. It sounds important, and then people, they don't necessarily tune out, but they distance themselves, saying, oh, this is something that I can't grasp. Or is that somehow something for the experts to figure out, not for community to engage in. But I think one of the things that we've heard over and over again today is that you have to engage community in your data practice in order for it to be equitable, but also in order for it to be effective. So the question, that I would love for y'all to reflect upon is how we bridge that divide, right, between these data and technology challenges, which sometimes are technical, right? But the essential nature of making sure that they are also community-oriented in a deep and meaningful way. How do we bridge that divide?
Okay, big question. And you mentioned too in your previous question about places where we could stand back a little bit. So I wanted to pick up on that as well. I feel like sometimes when we get into when we come together to talk about the power of data, we lean a little bit too much at times on whatever the flashiest data visualization technology is available to us at the time. And I think that can often override the richness of the insights that we're gaining from the interrelational aspects of the data collection, and also scrambling the power relationships and how that happens and who's asking the questions of whom. So I think that is one way to maybe sometimes just cool it a little bit on the data visualization emphasis, and really think about data visualization for whom. I was listening closely when Cassandra Kaufman this morning from the St. Louis Mental Health Board was talking about going into communities and presenting data to get a readout from, and people feeling affronted at what they were hearing. So that is a red flag, certainly, that we all need to take seriously. And really, I think at the heart of your question is around who gets centered in those discussions. And we are constantly centering ourselves, honestly. And how do we stop doing that? It's a challenge, and I think that you know, we need to be sharing more and having more mentorship around how to go into these conversations in a very humble way and have them be led as much as possible by the communities who are contributing and generating and donating their time and their data to power these discussions.
When you were talking, Catherine, you reminded me of a point, actually, when we're going out to communities and engaging them for their feedback. Question to the audience, do you feel like you are being surveyed too much by government, by companies, by whoever? Do you get a lot of requests to be surveyed and you just ignore them and, okay, yeah, I see a lot of nodding. So that's a tension, right? How do we go out and engage the community on every initiative we think is worthwhile, and then it's not just me, it's other departments like Yusuf, who was here prior, but not expose you to the survey fatigue that you have to go through because you're tired of answering the questions over and over again. One of the solutions I had read about was maybe you need to compensate people for their time to take the surveys, right? And maybe it's actually focus groups. And you ask them all the questions all at once, and you don't have to, here's the IT guy asking you a question, then there's the housing guy asking you a question, then the health person asking you the question. It's all these questions all at once for whatever, half a day, and we feed you lunch, and we pay you a stipend. So does that sound like a reasonable trade-off? Oh, okay, great. All right, so that's one takeaway. Yes?
Oh, no, question. For example, how many surveys do you provide to communities in our ethnic communities, for example, that include the question, what is the primary language spoken in your country?
That's a good question, and I don't have the answer to that. Yeah, and accessibility obviously is a huge thing to make sure you're not marginalized communities even more, right? Making them feel even less part of the ecosystem that you're trying to serve. To get back to Paul's question about balancing the tension, and that's a good one because in one of the projects I'm working on right now, I have this similar issue, and allow me a second to describe what the project is, and then I'll come back to why I have this tension, and maybe you guys can help me solve it. Bridging the digital divide, ensuring everybody has access to the internet. There's three legs to that stool. One is to make sure everybody has Wi-Fi or access to fiber, and you can subscribe with Charter or Verizon, whoever your carrier is, and you can get fiber at home. That's what people normally associate with the digital divide, and as long as I have access to the internet, it's great. Well, in my learnings, and what I found out is there's two equally important other legs to that stool. One is around affordability. Just because Charter serves your area doesn't mean you can afford to pay for it. And you might not have a device even if you could afford the internet, because there's affordable connectivity programs that actually pay for your internet service, but you might not be able to afford a computer or a laptop to actually leverage that service. The third leg of that stool is around adoption or education, right? You might have both of those, but you don't know how to use it. And my parents were a great example of that, right? They had iPads, but the only thing they knew was to press that YouTube thing and then go into the playlist and play that. And so they were, I mean, they used the internet, but they weren't actually educated consumers about how to leverage the power of the internet. So if there's those three legs of the stool that I talked about. Now, earlier this year, Ernst & Young, in coordination with the Regional Business Council, published a report about the state of broadband in St. Louis, right? And I'll just focus on the city because that's my domain right now. There's 24% of the households without a computer, right? Some of them have smartphones, but there's 24% without a computer at home. The Affordable Connectivity Program, ACP, which the federal government actually pays you up to $30 to have an internet connection at home. There's about 71,000 eligible households in the city of St. Louis, but there's only 28,000 people that have signed up, right? So what does that get? About 40,000 people, we don't have information about why they don't want to sign up. Either they don't care about it, which can't be all of them, right? They don't know about the Affordable Connectivity Program because nobody's told them about it, and our messaging is just falling on deaf ears, or it's not effective. So they don't know that they can get reimbursed for it. But in order to go get that information about why they are being left behind and they cannot participate in today's digital economy, takes effort, takes time. You have to go out in the community, engage them. And by virtue of the fact that they are not connected to the internet, you can't survey them digitally like you would other survey groups, right? It has to be paper, it has to be face-to-face, and you have to be talking to them. The dilemma that I'm thinking about is, and this applies across all social impact organizations and governments, you have the set of clients, citizens, residents that need a service, right? And in my case, it's the people on the other side of this divide. You have a set of resources that you want to provide them, and you just need to match up the right client with the right resource, right? It's just this matching it. And actually, Paul wrote this great white paper. I can't remember the title, but it talked about how do we manage this more effectively. And it's kind of building a directory of all the clients and a resource, a listing of all the resources available to serve them, and then have some community governance around it so that it's used for the right reasons and not abused, right? If I had that for solving the issues of the digital divide, I think I could be a lot more effective with the spend, the few dollars that I have, and ensuring that we can drive that number to zero, right? Everybody just raise your hand and say, I need either access to the internet, or a device, or training, or all of the three, or two of the three. And tell me more about your circumstance. I cannot get to a class at the community college because I don't have transportation, right? I have 3 kids at home, and both of them have to do homework, so the speed of the internet has to be X. To your point about language access, English is not our primary language, and my primary language is X. So I would like to collect all these data points about all these clients that need service, and then do a matching game, which is pretty easy from a technical perspective, of how to meet their needs, right? The Affordable Connectivity Program takes care of a lot of the affordability, but there's other organizations out there, and very well-meaning organizations, the Public Library, PCs for People, that provide devices to people, right? How do we ensure that those devices are distributed effectively to the people that need them and not to the people that don't need them, right? Hotspots during the COVID pandemic, they distributed over 4,000 hotspots to people who needed internet connectivity at home. Well, if I knew that there was, 500 people in a block that didn't have internet connectivity, maybe a better spend of the dollar is to install some sort of fixed wireless to the building, right? And not have to have all those individual hotspots all in one place. The tension I have is privacy and security versus effectiveness of deploying resources, right? And I think even Afua mentioned it as one of the 4 legs of her framework. How do you guarantee that the information provided by residents like you to a government entity like me is going to be only used for the right purposes and not used to target you. If you're an illegal resident, if you are below a certain income, if you have a brush with the criminal justice system. And so I'm interested if you have thoughts around that, on how to address it, because it seems like a very central problem that affects all of us, right? The more information you have about your clients, the better service you can provide. But the more information you have about a client, the less, or the more secure you have to be, and the more attention you have to pay to privacy issues, which raises your costs.
So I think those are excellent points, and I think they work really well together, both from Catherine and Simon, right? These questions around the quantitative or qualitative, and data being used to really inform what we know, right, about an issue or a community or a person, right? So like, what is that understanding, and pushing against like that there is one understanding, there is one objective truth, right? But understand in the full complexity of what we're trying to address. And then I think, Simon, you raise a number of other good questions that may bring attention to the quantitative versus the qualitative, which is what can we do, right? And especially what can we do with limited resources, and trying to connect the dots between those resources community need, but also making sure, right, that the same data collection systems aren't punitive or carceral in any way. We did this has been a great fireside chat. I wish all of I don't have fireside chats, but if I did have more fireside chats, I'd want them all to be like this. We did want to open it up for folks who may have additional questions or comments. I think I see, well, I will let the facilitators, you saw first dibs on hands, so go forth and we'll go from there.
I was just going to offer that, I cannot stand duplication of effort. So what I would do in your circumstance is collaborate with the community service providers that already have all that information and let them distribute what we need to do to fix that situation.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, there's someone back there.
Yeah, I had a question about the surveying. I think surveying is great, but on the other hand, I do think that there needs to be like a mechanism in which, let's just say, there's, like from 1 to 10, are you satisfied with this service? If someone scores below a 7 or 6, that focus group that you're talking about might come in handy. So I was just thinking, what kind of mechanisms are you thinking of in terms of the city, in terms of community engagement when it comes to getting feedback from those, surveys? Because usually, like when I take the survey, like if it's just one-off and I'm not going to get any feedback, that might actually lower the motivation for someone to take a survey, knowing that I can say I'm dissatisfied, I can, have my little text box and go off, but, I think if having some verbiage saying, we will touch base with you if you, I think that would maybe be a good, thing to do. And I was just wondering, have you ever thought of that? Because, I filled out some of these forms.
No, and you raise a great point. If you don't close that feedback loop, then you're going to disincentivize people from participating in it further, right? I filled out those surveys too, and sometimes it's just good to get it off my chest, but I think the companies that stick out in your head, or the organizations, are the ones that actually have circle back and tell you what they're doing about it, or why they can't do something specific about your issue. Yeah.
I don't have a microphone anymore, but I have a suggesting voice. Yeah, like for example, Amtrak. I remember I voiced off. Oh, thank you. I remember Amtrak had like a good survey, and I had like not a good experience there, and I didn't expect anything to happen. And the next thing you know, they send me like a $50 credit, and apologizing for the poor service. So I do think like that makes me feel like incentivized to take Amtrak again.
Sure.
So I think that knowing that as a community, when we're getting, submitting data, that it's being listened to, and there's some feedback, I think that's also what we need to think about when we're getting this data, this just community engagement, because data should be a back and forth process and also integrate not only the quantitative, but the qualitative aspects as well. And that also will enrich our data collection process and the quality of data that we get.
Can I jump in real quick too? I wanted to actually connect a theme from this morning's panel with a theme from this afternoon's panel, because it has to do with this issue of the repeated cycle of needs assessment surveys that the morning panel that came up. And both in terms of the time and effort it takes for people to continually participate in that, and then the variable outcomes around responsiveness. And then this afternoon's session was so fascinating from the regional response team, and thank you very much, because it spoke to this gap that exists. For every needs assessment that is conducted, the question is, what do we not know about how the system functions to create those needs? And there is a huge amount of missing data there because it is either proprietary or it is purposefully hidden, or it is just not tapped. And that is what I would like to see more of, because that is that gets us upstream to the driving factors. And it calls out and makes it the accountability and the responsibility of people who hold power to also contribute data to the conversation. Now, is the data that you were talking about this afternoon? That too is community data, but it is not highlighted. So that, to my mind, is a real takeaway for me, and something that I think that we would like to work more on at MFH.
I think that's great. And I also want to say too, right, going to the RRT data, it changes all the time. I mean, like there are circumstances in which you see huge spikes month to month in who's being evicted and who's having their utilities cut off. And if you just do a needs assessment once every 3 years, and you're like, oh, this is a static community that we can respond to in a static way, right, you miss so much. And so not only do we want to get deeper information about the more systemic factors, but I think also this like culture of responding and doing and sharing back in a way in which these things become more present but less burdensome is something that we're also trying to chew on. Do we have time for one or two more questions? Yeah, Sal.
Thanks, Paul. Great conference today, fantastic comments, and I was inspired. I was listening offline because I had to be away from St. Louis, but I listened online for the majority of today's conference. And I came away with the thought that we're all in a transformational moment through technology and demographic changes. And the data has power, I think, as long as we're clear about how we define what that data is. In demographic terms, it can either marginalize people more, in communities more, or empower us. And the questions, I like the suggestion about making sure you work with the direct service providers in the immigrant and ethnic communities, other communities. And I think we're all working toward the same direction, but I have a couple questions. What if can we use data that is already existent to make our picture whole? Are we missing something? Are we not unpeeling the onion? And I'm struck with the disparities in the COVID and opioids epidemics, pandemic, in terms of the impact on our ethnic communities. In our state, in our city, the only communities that grew were ethnic communities. We lost communities otherwise. And so how do we look at the maps that are available, for example, for opioids? We already have those available for the city and county, and we also have the LEP maps, the limited English proficient map. And oftentimes I think the challenge for many of us is how are we communicating or not communicating with these communities? So I'm just, I would like to have your thoughts about how do we collaborate closer with all communities and redefine what the issues are in terms of what their needs are.
Great. And thank you. So that will be our last question, but I think Sal, would love thoughts both about how you reach different communities where they're at, as well as this question about do we have the data that we need, right? Or are there things that we have still yet to know because we haven't reached out to the right folks in the right way?
Do you have an answer?
It comes back to relationships, I think. It's as simple as asking, but you have to ask in the context of a relationship that you are investing in continually. Going to communities on occasion and asking a set of questions without those relationships built is a fool's errand. So I think that, again, going back to the mind and the heart that goes into, and what was discussed at the panel this morning around being very good listeners and being very good relationship builders is at the heart of collecting quality data. So knowing what to ask and also being told what to ask. Yeah.
And I guess I would go back to the suggestion that the lady in front gave me a little earlier, is to reach out to the organizations that have those established relationships already, that are trusted entities. I know for language access, the International Institute has been a great partner, right? And Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And when a government such as ours doesn't have the resource to do it all, then we have to depend on the partnerships. And to your point, Catherine, the relationships then become the relationships with the partners that can kind of magnify the effort a little bit. Yeah, that's...
Well, I think ending on trust and relationship building and responsiveness is a great place to end. Thank you both so much for this excellent conversation.
Thank you.
Great. And I think Jen Rose is going to wrap us up. Thank you all for staying till the end. What Jen Rose may not tell you is only your parking validations will work. Everyone else who left early, they're going to have to pay full price. So thank you for staying. It's in your best interest. Thank you, everyone.
And I just want to one more time, can you give a big round of applause to all of our amazing presenters and panelists today. Whew. I know I have really enjoyed listening to all of them, and I'm still processing a lot of things. And for those of you who did stay for so long, thank you so much for being here. We hope you will continue to engage with the Data Science for Social Impact initiative. What's next for DSSI? As we're moving into the next phase of work, we're really talking about forming communities of practice with people who have been engaged with us already, expanding the training opportunities, both foundational and advanced training opportunities that we have started, and then things like the St. Louis data drill with the regional response team. We're creating a data drill toolkit that will be released next year. So there's a lot of stuff coming, and we hope you'll stay involved with us. And 3 things that you can do. I'll end. How to stay engaged. Take the conversation back to your organization. One way to do that, sign up for a free online course. We have materials for how to like pose a series of questions within your organization, but in whatever way, take the conversations here back to your organization. Share your thoughts, fill out the survey. How many plugs can we do for the survey? And if you haven't already, join the St. Louis Regional Data Alliance. And these are ways that you will continue to know any tools and things that are available from our end. And look for that follow-up email, because we will share all of the resources that were shared here today. So give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here. We hope you have a lovely evening.